Hi everybody and welcome to my video. My name is Fatima. Today I thought I would sit down and record a 5-star / favorite reads of 2022 video. I've been watching so many others and I wanted to contribute my own favorites list and thought that would be fun. So thanks in advance for watching, and I hope you're able to find some new favorites and see what I enjoyed this year and hopefully pick them up if you haven't already. So in no particular order, first I had 25 books on my favorites list on my Goodreads account, so we're gonna go based off of that because I wrote like little mini reviews for each of them. So I don't have a physical copy of with me. I have some of them. Some of them I don't. Most of them I don't. So the first one I have is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. And I knew that I had to go into this listening to the audiobook because Jennette's obviously an actress, and I knew that I would be able to really connect with her through her voice, and I love that. And so I thought it was absolutely incredible. My review says that I highly recommend listening to the audiobook because her narration is just incredible. You're able to hear the emotions in her voice, and a lot of it is very emotional and very heavy stuff. So I felt like I was listening to a friend, talk about her story, and I thought it was really impressive, and it was really well written. It was funny. It was very true to Jennette. I thought it was just such a well written memoir, and I highly recommend it. If you haven't picked it up already, definitely pick it up with the audiobook. My next favorite I also don't have a copy of, but it is Bola by Pajtim Statovci. That I definitely mispronounced that. This was an amazing book. And in my review I have a little quote from the novel that I wrote in the beginning just to highlight it, and it says, "Isn't it strange, again and again, as if to humiliate themselves, people fool themselves into thinking they can get time back somehow, how time only becomes important once it has passed." And this was, from what I remember, this was a really heavy book, and it talks about the devastation of war from the author's perspective in Kosovo. So there's two main characters, and they're both very miserable and very just like stuck in this war-stricken, awful time and setting, and so just having to watch them get through that misery, and then also because of that, the just like awful feelings they have about themselves and regarding humanity. It was just really interesting to read about, and I thought it was so well written. This is a translated work, so it was just very unsettling and very beautiful at the same time, and it's a very short novel, just over 200 pages I think, and it's just devastating from start to finish. It talks about love, it talks about friendship, it talks about finding companionship and trying to find humanity after something has been torn apart, if that makes sense. And I just highly recommend it. Lots of content warnings. It's very heavy, like I said, and it's very difficult to read. I don't think it's suited for everybody, but it is such a special tiny book that I think is completely worth your time. So that was Bola. The next one, I had a couple of rereads in here. So I reread the Heartstopper series by Oseman, which, if you know, came out with a Netflix series this year, which was so good and so wonderful. And it's just a series that I have gone back to over and over again. This was probably my third or fourth reread of the comic books themselves. It's just so healing and so nice and so wonderful. And if you're just looking for something short and fun to read, I highly recommend that. I highly recommend the Netflix series. Definitely check it out. Okay, the next one of my favorites that I have somewhere in this ridiculous pile in front of me, I have Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. This was so good. I had read The House in the Cerulean Sea by the same author, I think this year or last year, I don't remember anymore. I had read that book, but I didn't love it. This one though, this one I loved. And my review says that this absolutely destroyed me, and it really did. It has like very Ghibli-esque vibes, which is what made me interested in this book in the first place, because I had read someone else's review about it and they said that it gave them very Ghibli vibes, very dreamlike vibes, and it's so cute. It's like a very quiet and heartfelt story that I don't want to spoil too much, and I don't know how to not spoil so much of it, but well, I'll read the synopsis. So it says, "Welcome to Sharon's Crossing. The tea is hot, the scones are fresh, and the dead are just passing through. When a reaper comes to collect Wallace from his own funeral, Wallace begins to suspect he might be dead. And when Hugo, the owner of a peculiar tea shop, promises to help him cross over, Wallace decides he's definitely dead. But even in death, he's not ready to abandon the life he barely lived. So when Wallace is given 1 week to cross over, he sets about living a lifetime in 7 days. Hilarious, haunting, and kind, Under the Whispering Door is an uplifting story about a life spent at the office and a death spent building a home." And that's so true. I already want to reread it because it's just so heartwarming and so wonderful, and I just highly recommend this. It's a very warm and comforting read, and it's just, it feels like taking, you know, a sip of tea, you know, and it just warms your entire body and soul. So that is Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. This is part of a series, and I have the first book here because I read the first book. I read the whole series this year. So let me find my review for the first book. And if you know me at all, I read this series in the beginning of 2022, and it completely consumed me. I had to wait for the last book, and the last book came out at the end of the year, and it's just incredible, and that is Beartown by Fredrik Backman. I don't think this comes as a surprise to anybody, and it's just such a good book. And Fredrik Backman is one of my new favorite authors. I discovered him at the end of 2021 when I read A Man Called Ove, which is another book I highly recommend to everybody, one of my all-time favorites. But with Beartown, favorite book of the year, favorite series ever after The Raven Cycle, which is like one of, like, I just hold this story and these characters so close to my heart. So with this, it's a story about community, it's a story about humanity, it's a story about very flawed people and having to live together and having to take care of each other despite being so flawed and despite having, you know, to each their own. Everyone has their own thing going on, but Backman just does such an incredible job of telling these stories and knitting them together in a way that makes everything feel so much bigger. So it's just a quiet, comforting story with a lot happening, very heavy stuff happening. You know, there's lives at stake, there's people's stories upending, people's lives like changing, page after page. It's crazy, and it just is a story that takes you on this journey about what it means to be human. It's incredible, and I love his writing style. It's so comforting, and he has crafted characters that I know are so special to him as well, you know? Like, he has taken care of these characters from page one and has made the reader want to care and know so much about them. So yeah, incredible story. I rated every single book in the series. It's trilogy. I rated every single book 3 stars. So Beartown, Us Against You, and The Winners. And yeah, I'm just completely obsessed with this series. I highly recommend it if you're just like looking for a series to completely consume you, for a series to, you know, just like you want to be connected and attached to these characters, then Beartown. There we go. Okay, I don't know how long I've been talking for, and I still have so much to go. What's next? Next I don't have this copy, but I have We Are the Brennans by Tracey Lange. I'm sorry. My review for this says that I loved this book, and I really did. I loved it. And this is also one of those stories that's about community and family and people coming back to each other, which I absolutely adore those kind of stories. It's contemporary fiction, it's slice of life, it's family dynamics, it's a story about siblings and family and stuff I love. So, you know, automatic 5 stars. And then I have Notes on an Execution by Danya, Kukafka. And I thought this was an amazing story. I heard about it, and I heard about how it was a story about like a serial killer, and how it was his story about like coming down to him getting executed, I think, if that's the right way to say it, I don't know. But it's about his fate and about him, you know, having to suffer the consequences of what he's done, of the crimes he's committed. And so I steered clear away from that. But then it was another review that I had read about how it was just such a fast-paced read, and how you just really start to think about humans and like why people do what they do. And I was like, okay, I should probably read this. So I had checked it out from the library, and it was incredible. It's a complex and gripping story about a serial killer's fate that he brought upon himself and how he got there. And it's such an intricate story. It like ticks down to like his last few hours, last few minutes, and it's like, why do people turn bad? You know, like what causes people to do what they do? And, you know, like, how do people who were directly involved in this murderer's life feel, and like what have they gone through? I'm reading off of my review. It says, it was interesting to see where things started to get confusing and not make sense anymore, whether it was from the serial killer's point of view or others. There was so much doubt everywhere and so much having to make sense out of nothing. And it's like you're very much putting the pieces together on your own, and then when something gets revealed, you're like, oh, like that makes sense, you know? And so it was engaging that way. It was so interesting to see, and highly recommend. And then next, do I have a copy of this one? I don't think I do. I think I have, I think I do. I should. Do I not? Oh well. It's The Charm Offensive by Alison, Cochrun. It's a very short, sweet, but predictable, but just like, you know, sometimes you need that, and sometimes you just need to consume yourself with something that you can rely on, and it's not unpredictable or anything. So definitely a new comfort read. And it says #1 in a series, so I'm looking forward to whatever comes next after that. Okay, the next one I have right here, it's Tell Me How to Be by Neel Patel. And I love this story. This was so interesting and so wonderful and personal, and it very much felt like the author was just like bearing their soul to us, despite it being fiction, and like despite these characters being fictional. I have in my review that I'm so grateful to Patel for writing this, and I think it's a book that everyone can go into and come out learning something new, and stories like that are so special and so rare to find sometimes. So highly recommend this one. I will read the back because I think it's really interesting. So Renu Amin always seemed perfect, but as the 1-year anniversary of her husband's death approaches, Renu is binge watching soap operas and simmering with old resentments. She can't stop wondering if 35 years ago she chose the wrong life. In Los Angeles, her son Akash has everything he ever wanted, but he is haunted by the painful memories he fled a decade ago. When his mother tells him she is selling the family home, Akash returns to Illinois, hoping to finally say goodbye and move on. Together, Renu and Akash pack up the house, retreating further into the secrets between them. When their pasts catch up to them, Renu and Akash must decide between the lives they left behind and the ones they've since created. Tell Me How to Be by Neel Patel. You should read it. The next one, I don't have a copy of either, but it's a collection of poems, and it's I Hope This Finds You Well by Kate Baer, and it's such an interesting concept. It's messages that Baer received that are focused on marriage and motherhood, and she took messages she received. I'm trying to remember. She took messages she received, and she turned them into poems about, you know, empowerment, motherhood, womanhood. And it's a really quick read, but I think it's completely worthwhile. And I had never heard of this author before. I don't know how I came across her work, but I'm so grateful I did. And I think it's incredible and very, very moving and very touching. And I think there's something in it that everyone can, you know, learn and benefit from. The next book I have is The Binding by Bridget Collins. And this, I don't even know how to describe this, but it's very much like fairy tale-ish and fantasy, whimsical, magical realism aspects, but like not so in your face about it. And I don't know if that makes sense, but this is such a beautiful story. There's so much to it, and it's about this young farmer who begins an apprenticeship as a bookbinder, and bookbinding in this society is very superstitious and prejudiced, but you know, he goes into this with like very high hopes, and he wants to, you know, change his life basically. And he's always been drawn to books, so he wants to learn more about like why bookbinding, why books, why this sort of stuff is forbidden in his society, and like what's the story behind that. And then that just like is the catalyst for it all. So he goes into this apprenticeship and like things happen, and it's such an interesting series of events that is so unpredictable from start to finish. You don't know what's going to happen next. It was such a page turner, but it very much took its time in developing this story, and I think it's so well written and such a magical story, like such a quiet magical story. It's nothing in your face. It's nothing like you have to like, you know, really think about. But yeah, I think it's wonderful, and the cover is beautiful, and I'm so happy to own a copy of it because it very much is a story that like reminds me of why I love reading and why I love storytelling, and it's just so impressive, and I highly recommend you check it out. The next book I have is The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa, and this is a Japanese book. And 2022 was the year I got into Japanese stories for some reason. It just like, I kept coming across them and I kept reading them, and I'm so glad I did because this was so wonderful. And Japanese stories are some of the most heartwarming and tender and well-written stories I've ever read. And you know, this story, it's about a housekeeper who is like, you know, living her everyday life as a housekeeper, and she never saw this for herself, but you know, it's what she has to do to make ends meet. And a professor who is the owner of the house she's taking care of, and he is a math professor, and he's an older gentleman, so it's about, you know, this unlikely friendship, which I love unlikely friendship about, you know, this professor and this housekeeper coming together despite their differences, and, you know, learning about each other and learning how they can help each other. And I think it was such a wonderful and heartwarming story, and Japanese stories are taking over by storm, and I think it's completely worth your time. Highly recommend. Then I have another reread, which is right here. This one. I don't think this needs any introduction or any review. This was my third time rereading it. 5 stars all around. 10 out of 10. My review says, one day I will be able to properly articulate my thoughts and feelings into words, but until then, this is the greatest love story of all time, and despite this being a reread, feels like reading something wonderful and new and treasured every single time. Yes. Next book I have is also a Japanese book, and it is Lonely Castle in the Mirror, and this was wonderful. I rated it 4.5, but it's in my favorites list, but thinking about it now, this is a 5 stars. I don't know why I said 4.5, but I enjoyed this so much. This is the epitome of like a modern fairy tale. This is like a classic in my heart. This is such a beautiful story. this is something that I can imagine as a movie, as like an animation, as like this very dreamlike, very magical, bubbly, and beautiful story. It has Ghibli vibes as well, which I loved. And my review says that there was so much care and tenderness put into this story, and I know it's one that I'll come back to time and time again, one that I want to share with everybody just because of how wonderful and like serene it made me feel. Like, it's very sad, which I think like so many Japanese stories have. It's like a very tender, very sad story, but it's so heartwarming, and just the way it progresses makes you feel so warm. I don't know, but on the back it has this cute little castle picture, and it says, "In another world we were already friends, so I am no longer alone." I love this one. I loved it. 5 stars. Next, I have a memoir, and that is In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. And this ruined me. I saw this all over Bookstagram, and I was like, okay, this is just something I have to read. Like, I have to read it. And so I initially checked it out as a book, a library book, and then after finishing, had to buy my own copy because I was like, I have to reread this and I have to annotate it. I wanted to underline and highlight and just like scribble so much throughout this book while I was reading it. I haven't done that yet, but I will. This is due for a reread very, very soon. But I'll read my review because I think it perfectly summarizes what I had thought after reading it. So the quote I wanted to highlight from it was, "A reminder to remember, just because the sharpness and of the sadness has faded does not mean that it was not once terrible. It means that only time and space, creatures of infinite girth and tenderness, have stepped between the two of you, and they are keeping you safe as they were once unable to." It's so well written, and this is just a must read. You have to read this. It is very heavy. It is very, look up the trigger warnings. It's very heavy. There's a lot to it. There's so much substance in this. There's so much going on, and I cannot believe I didn't pick this up sooner. And in my review I'm reading, it says, "I feel like there are very few books, let alone memoirs, that have made me feel like I can't even read my review because I'm like, ugh." It made me have such a visceral reaction to reading it. In the Dream House made me feel like I was being cracked open. My heart ached for something that I have never experienced. My jaw dropped multiple times throughout reading it, and I could not put in words. Even if I tried, like, I cannot put into words how well written and brutally honest this was, that it was frightening. Like, it scared me. And I would be so scared to be the person that this was written about. Like, I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked. It's an absolute masterpiece. I thank everyone who has recommended this to me because it is an experience, and I think it's an experience that everyone should go through, but I think it is an experience that you should be careful going into as well. But Machado absolutely deserves awards for this. It's amazing. And I have like multiple quotes in this review that I just like wrote out because I want to remember them, but I like need to go back and reread this and like completely like tear this apart in terms of like highlighting, annotating, all of that kind of stuff, because it is absolutely deserving of like analysis, and like essays can be written about this. Like, it's so good. Next, I don't have a copy of this, but I want to get one so bad, and I can't wait to get one, and that is Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. I've seen this in quite a few people's like reading wrap-ups or 2022 favorites lists, and for a completely good reason. You know, it's absolutely gorgeously written. It's such a sad and beautiful story, and I think that was like a theme for me this year. Like, unintentionally, I read a lot of sad but very beautiful stories that were just like either heartwarming when they ended or just like made me feel like, you know, just made me have that kind of reaction. The writing is so lyrical, and the book again reminds me of why I love reading so much. It's good. Take my word for it. Don't listen to the Goodreads reviews because it's very mixed reviews, but read it. That's it. Okay, another book by Yoko Ogawa that I read this year was The Memory Police. This one was so good too, and I think Ogawa is just like a new favorite author of mine after reading these two books by them. It's such a strange story, unlike The Housekeeper and The Professor. It's such a strange dystopian-like story, but it's like not in your face about it. It's a very subtle and quiet story. Just very interesting to see how these sorts of stories get translated, and how, despite being originally written in another language, they have been translated into something that, you know, someone like me whose first language is not Japanese, and how they have personally like had an effect on me as well. The writing is beautiful. I hung on to every sentence I was reading. Ogawa's writing is just absolutely incredible, and it's a must read if you're into Japanese literature at all. So read it. Next I have Human Acts by Han Kang, and this is a Korean story, and this is a story about the Gwangju uprising, and this is a story that once I read it, I was in shock. I don't think I read anything after this for a while, just because I was like, what the heck did I just read? And it's haunting, it's beautiful, it's riveting, it's brutal, it's very, very horrendous. It's just insanely written. Like, I could not get over it, and like I'm remembering it now, like details of it, and it's so brutal. It's so brutal, and it feels like a classic. It feels like required reading. It feels like something that everyone needs to read and know about, despite it being another country's history. But it's so impactful, and it's just a masterpiece. Honestly, it's a masterpiece, and there's like different narratives in it that tie each story together. It was so wonderfully written and complex and very realistic, very human, very emotional. I cried multiple times. It's very heavy, but Hong Kong just has a beautiful way with words, and I thought the translation was incredible. Like, there wasn't anything in it that made me, like, it was so smooth. There was nothing in it that was like, oh yeah, this is a translation, you know? Like, it felt so smooth. It felt like a real story, and I can only imagine how beautiful and moving it is in its original language, in Korean. But I'm so glad I read it. I'm so glad that, you know, the translation is there to give me the opportunity to read it. It's like one of those books that it's so beautiful, it's so moving, and it's like scary how good it is, and scary with how brutal it is. So that's Human Acts. The next book is The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie O, and I have this very beautiful copy of it, this beautiful edition. It's so stunning. It's, the freaking side is a dragon. It's beautiful. I am obsessed with it, and I love this story as well, so I'm so glad I have like a beautiful copy of one of my favorite reads of the year. This is definitely like in my top 5 if I had to rank it. I didn't rank it because I don't think I could, but it's in my top 5. It's like a retelling of a Korean legend. It has like, you know, those historical elements to it, and it also has these magical elements to it with like all these magical creatures and you know, like magical powers and like magical realism and stuff like that. It's definitely a new comfort read. This was very like character driven, very like female driven, which I loved. Very reminiscent of Ghibli's Spirited Away, which I guess is another theme in my favorites list this year, like very Ghibli-esque. All the reviews are raving for great reason, but you know, as much as this was like reminiscent of like all these other magical stories and magical aspects of storytelling, it very much is its own story and its own fairy tale, and like because of that, like its own classic. You know, there's so many elements in this that are classic to its story, and it's so beautiful. And Like if you're a fan of like historical and fantasy Korean dramas like I am, then oh, you will eat this up. This is so good. It's like exactly my cup of tea. I loved it. It's immersive, it's fun, the characters are fun, the characters are, you know, just like people you want to root for, and it's a very fun time. Very beautiful. Highly recommend. Next on my list I have 84 Charing Cross Road, and this is so comforting. This was such a short, very short, but comforting read. It's about, again, like the story of two unlikely people coming together and, you know, having a friendship bloom between them. And this was told through letters and conversations with friends about little things that bring you great joys in life. And I think that's just a great way to summarize what this is about. And yeah, super quick read, and it's just like very sentimental, very much like the good of friendship, if that makes sense. So that's it. Next I have The White Book by Han Kang. She's back on my list. And this, unlike Human Acts, is more so a collection of stories, and this was just like a beautiful ode to the color white. And it talks about, you know, the author has handpicked these things in their life that reminds them of the color white, and, you know, has written a little story for each of them. So, you know, you would think like white symbolizes peace and prosperity, calm, rebirth, purity, stillness, clarity. But for Kang, you know, it represents like calamity, destruction, despair, pain, a brutally cold winter, and like the relentless haunting of a story untold, and just like all these unexpected things. But it was so interesting because it was like, oh, these are things that Kang thought of when they thought of the color white, you know, like this is what that means to them. That was The White Book, which I don't have a copy of, but I hope I can get my hands on it soon, because definitely worth a read, definitely worth a reread, and I think it's a beautiful story, and again, a beautiful work of translated fiction that I think everyone should read. And last, this is the last one I have, is Circe by Madeline Miller, same author as The Song of Achilles. And this was, I knew I was going to go into this loving it, but it exceeded my expectations, and I just loved this retelling. It's very different from The Song of Achilles, but in a very good way. It's about, you know, finding yourself and understanding yourself as a person, and understanding how you are as a person when you're having to deal with things such as, you know, loneliness and self-hatred and stuff like that. And I thought the ensemble of characters in this were really well written, and it was just such a joy to watch them, you know, come together, such a joy to watch Circe grow as a character. And it's atmospheric, it's lush, it's a beautiful retelling, everything you would expect from Madeline Miller's writing, and just like times 10, you know, it's just so good. And that's everything I have on my 2022 favorites list. Thanks for watching this stupidly long video, and I hope you are able to find something to read, find a new reading recommendation, and that also becomes your favorite. If not, that's okay too, you know, like let me know what some of your favorites were, but I hope you had a fun time listening to me ramble, and thanks for sticking around, and happy reading. Bye.